All right, our top story coming from the United States.
Right, US President Joe Biden and Republican leaders offered hope of a deal that could help avoid an unprecedented debt default, given the huge ramifications, of course. However, big challenges remain. The White House has announced Biden would be shortening his upcoming Asia tour as well.
Yes, that's the big story that the world is watching after the latest negotiations ended without a breakthrough. Republican House Speaker Kevin McCarthy said that there was still a lot of work to do. While stark differences remained, the White House said that Biden was optimistic that there is a path to a responsible bipartisan budget agreement.
Now, on Monday, the Treasury Secretary said US could begin defaulting potentially as early as the 1st of June, while the non-partisan Congressional Budget Office has forecast the 15th of June as the date.
The White House said that Biden had directed his staff to continue to meet daily on outstanding issues. The US president would confer with the Republican leaders on his return from the G7 meetings. Biden, who is set to attend the G7 summit in Japan, scrapped an onward journey to Papua New Guinea and AUKUS summit in Australia. Instead, he will be returning to Washington from Hiroshima on Sunday.
That defaulting on the debt is simply not an option. Our economy would fall into recession. It would devastate retirement accounts, increase borrowing costs, and according to Moody's, nearly 8 million Americans would lose their jobs and our international reputation would be damaged in the extreme if we were to let that happen. It's disappointing that our discussions in the Congressional Republicans have not been willing to discuss raising revenues, but the policy differences between the parties should not stop Congress from avoiding default.
Now, in a sign of nervousness over what could be the first ever U.S. debt default, over 140 CEOs sent a letter to Biden and congressional leaders stressing the need for an agreement. The letter, signed by the chief executives from Pfizer and Morgan Stanley, among others, stated that the U.S. must avert the potentially devastating scenario.
We've got to find a way that we can curve our spending, raise our debt limit, and also grow our economy. Now, I wish we had been able to be in this place 100 days ago. This is what we requested, but we are where we are.
Now, some senators have acknowledged that they may have to cancel the Memorial Day recess beginning Thursday to get a deal finalized. As the X date draws closer, Democrats in Congress have begun considering a range of alternatives, including using a congressional procedure to bypass McCarthy. They've also contemplated asking Biden to invoke the 14th Amendment to raise the debt ceiling unilaterally. Biden has cautioned that such a move could be challenged in court and has continued to call publicly for Republicans to support a clean increase to the debt ceiling. So what would this debt default mean, if at all that happens, and what will be its consequences? Haim is here to explain.
Thank you so much, Rohit. I will take over from here now. Joe Biden and top congressional Republican Kevin McCarthy's U.S. debt ceiling negotiations ended on Tuesday after less than an hour. Now, the looming fear of an unprecedented American debt default had prompted Biden to cut short an upcoming Asia trip as well, as we mentioned. The time is short. U.S. Congress has just a few days when both the House and the Senate are in session to pass the legislation. Scheduled recesses could be cancelled if more time, of course, is needed to clear whatever deal the White House reaches with McCarthy. Let's just also take a look at the crisis and the points of contention here. Now, first off, the Treasury has warned of grim consequences if the country runs out of cash to pay its bills. That would leave it unable to pay federal workers. A debt default here would trigger a likely surge in interest rates. There are fears of knock-on effects for businesses, mortgages, global markets here. The Republicans are demanding cuts of $130 billion from federal agencies and programs here. $130 billion, that is. Now, spending in 2024 fiscal years to 2022 levels, that's another expectation here as well. Republicans also want to expedite domestic energy production projects. They want to go ahead, simplify the process of obtaining permits for pipelines and refineries, and also claw back unspent COVID relief funding here. On the other hand, Democrats, they're calling for a clean increase of the borrowing limit with no strings attached. They have, as I mentioned, Democrats, they're pitching for clean increase of borrowing limit, no strings attached whatsoever. They've accused Republicans of using extreme tactics to push their agenda ahead of the so-called X date, at which US starts defaulting on its debt here. Now, for more on this, we earlier spoke to our correspondent Susan Teherani as well. Now, with time running short to address the debt ceiling or risk default, President Biden, as I mentioned earlier as well, is cutting his foreign trip short amid ongoing debt talks. Now, the question here is, how much pressure was he facing at home regarding this decision? Susan explains.
While President Biden will be traveling to Japan to take part in the G7 summit, he will now return to the United States on Sunday. He will not visit Papua New Guinea or Australia. He would have been the first sitting U.S. president to visit Papua New Guinea, and in Australia he was due to take part in a Quad summit. Kevin McCarthy and other Republicans had criticized the president for taking this trip at such a sensitive time, while McCarthy had noted that he hoped that the president would cut short his trip. Some Republicans even said that he should have canceled it altogether. On Tuesday, asked about Biden's international travel, McCarthy said, quote unquote, he believes the American public wants to have an American president focused on American problems and solution. Adding more pressure to this, Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen had said that the economic shock that would result from an unprecedented default could, quote unquote, lead to a recession.